So we have today, we'll get started. We have Holly Haws today. So this is actually somebody that like we've known each other for how long? I mean, we were your Matt's coach currently still, right?
Yep.
Yep. And I just stepped out January 1st, if you didn't hear that. So so Holly and I like basically started together as little baby coaches, over 7 years ago, roughly 7 years ago. And she is really good at the finances and investing, like really good. And she's really good at chunking it down for clients where it feels doable. And with the steps, she doesn't have ADHD and yet does really good with clients who do, because she can kind of bring the organization and the pieces and the details. And then they can bring the implementation into execution. And so that's why I asked her to come on, because I'm going to let you do your bio, but like you are a legitimate investor. Like you've done a lot of stuff. So I'm going to pass it to you if you want to give the bio and all that stuff. But yeah, we're just really grateful. You were like, I thought of having you on here a long time ago. So it's neat to have your, so yeah, if you want to give your bio a little bit and kind of share, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Holly Haws. I was an agent for 9.5 years, almost a decade, in Wichita, Kansas. And a year and a half ago, my family moved to Fort Worth. And lucky for me, I had already transitioned full-time into coaching and teaching. And so it's been a really easy transition to just be able to pick up and go wherever we're going. Like you said, I've been a coach for, I say 8 years, but maybe it has only been 7. Maybe I've just been rounding up way too much and I'm confused a year now.
Maybe it is 8. I need to stop saying 7 then. Yeah, I gotta look.
Yeah, I would have said almost 8 because
that might
and
be
we're
it.
getting up on our first family reunion as a coach. So whatever the date is. Anyway, I sold almost exactly 1,000 homes in my career, and most of those were over 100 units a year. My top 3 years were between 135 and 155 houses a year. And those last 3 years were all with a team of 4. It was me and my husband and 2 admin working full time. So I think it's different when you have a group of people that come in and they talk about selling 100 houses a year, and then it's like a team of 20 versus 100 people coming in and it's a team of 4. And so I've done it. I've done the over 100 homes a year, working with investors. The bulk of all of my business has been working with investors. And frankly, it's something I'm passionate about. As Tyler knows, I'm really passionate about helping agents who want to work with investors at a high level, but also helping agents become investors themselves. Because when you have a portfolio that pays your expenses every month, you now have choices financially that you don't have if you don't have that portfolio paying your bills every month. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, totally. And so this call, like, because I know some people, when we talk about investing, right, you could use this call for 2 things. One, to like purchase homes yourself, or now you're going to have the knowledge to then get with an investor and say, hey, here are the steps. And so this could be like a call for lead gen too. Like, hey, I took this great call, or I was on this call, and or however you want to frame it, and here's like how, if you want to build wealth, or if you're ready to invest right now, here's what this looks like. I mean, is that how you would say people can use this if they're not going to buy a house themselves?
Yeah, so it's kind of a big, we kind of ended, Tyler, with a really big title for the class, how to close over 100 deals in 1 year working with investors. Like that's kind of big. And I've spent some time this weekend really breaking it down into, but like, what can you take from like 30 minutes today that would actually be actionable? And I think I've broken it down. There's 2 little action items that you're welcome to do whatever you'd like to do. And if I could help you just break it down to 2 simple action items, that's my goal for today. And then whether you choose to take action on both of them, one of them, or none of them, that's completely your choice. But I absolutely want there to be something that you could take from this call that would immediately help boost your confidence in what you need so that you can close more transactions this year, because you're working at the next level with your investor clients.
Cool. Well, yeah, if you want to take it over and let's learn. I'm ready.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So I broke it down, like I kind of already said, I really broke it down into 5 components. But I don't want you to think, here's what I'd encourage. I would almost encourage you to just step back and absorb what you can absorb from these 5. Like I would almost say you don't necessarily need to try to take notes about every piece, or I kind of have, and Tyler knows this well, but I kind of have a little bit of a bossy personality, and it's just who I am. And so some of this could come across as do this, 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 and this. And so I'm going to just encourage you from the front, from the very beginning of that, don't interpret it that way. If that's at all, if it's at all possible, like, let's just see what your brain absorbs. And then if it's okay, we'll get a little bit closer to the end and I'll give you what the 2 action items are that I think would be beneficial in moving you forward. And I think they would move you forward whether you're working with 15 investors already, or you've never once a day in your life thought about working with investors. So I hope that's kind of like a fair context, but I'm just going to run through the 5 things that I think would be really important in thinking through this really big topic of how to close 100 deals that you're working with investors. And the first, and Tyler, you tell me, I have slides that I can put up, but I don't know that they're really needed. What would that add something to the group?
I think visuals are helpful,
Sweet.
and I think and like yeah, I think visuals are helpful, and directness is good, right? So here, this is what's really neat, and I want to say this, like, people are noticing our community, people who don't have ADHD, and they want to help and they want to do something. And that's what Holly's doing. Like, she wants to do this for free. She doesn't have ADHD. She doesn't have a kid with ADHD. Like, she just cares. So we're kind of teaching her too, like, because she's got some ADHD clients, what works well. And so yes, visuals is something that people report are really helpful. And directness, right? You said you can be bossy. Like, we like directness. I think, like, versus it. So feel free to be direct, for sure.
Sweet. Okay, so we're chunking it down into 5 ways. Okay, so from a mindset perspective, starting to really understand how an investor thinks and recognizing that that's different than how a regular buyer or seller thinks. When you have more of that understanding, it's a lot easier for you to work with investors at a high level. It's a lot easier for them to choose to work for you, and work with you, and it's a lot easier for them to continue to come back to you over time. So things like what makes a deal a really good deal, you have to start figuring that out. How would the top 10 or the top 20 investors in my area identify a good deal? I can tell you from speaking with hundreds of investors across the last 14 or 15 years, investors are looking for opportunities where they can add value. They're looking for opportunities that cash flow after all of the bills and expenses are paid. They're looking for, or they're looking for, I don't want to get super technical. So I would say it's that they're either looking for opportunities where they can add value, or they're looking for opportunities where there's cash left over at the end of the month after all the bills are paid, cash flow. And so starting to figure out in your area, what does a good deal look like? And the way we do that is we analyze deals. We look at how average deals perform, and then it's going to be clear when there's something that actually looks like a good deal. How do you analyze numbers? I've got a spreadsheet that I'll share with you right at the end, not to overwhelm, but I think it might make it a lot simpler of how we analyze investment properties. And so we'll dig through that right at the end. Another key component of a mindset that's required if you're going to work with investors is you have to avoid the mindset of, well, I have to raise my average price point or my average sales price. If that is your thought process, then you working with investors is never going to work well. And that actually was something that I ran into my first couple of years in the business. Really, it was my first couple of years in the business. I was really enjoying working with investors. They're non-emotional transactions. The numbers work or they don't work. We're not crying during a transaction. Nobody's mad. Like, It was beautiful. The investors were my favorite part of real estate for sure. And I had this really fantastic maps coach, like insanely fantastic maps coach, who really did care about me and really did think he was giving me the best advice. And he pushed me for 6 months solid that I needed to work on raising my average sales price. And at that time, my average sales price was somewhere in like the 90 or $100,000 range, like super low. And yet there was something about that that just didn't quite click with me because I was enjoying these investor transactions. And what I finally realized was that I actually didn't need to focus on raising my average sales price. I needed to focus on raising my dollar per hour. And there's multiple ways that you can raise your dollar per hour. One way to raise your dollar per hour is to raise your average sales price. That absolutely is a way to raise your dollar per hour. But another way that you can raise your dollar per hour is by systems and processes, or how exactly could I get myself to where I'm doing the same $100,000 deals over and over, but I'm spending less time per deal, right? How can I spend less time to achieve the same result? And part of what I think is so beautiful about working with investors is over time, if you do a really great job, they're going to be repeat clients for you. And they're also going to be raving fans. They're going to tell their friends and family about how you helped them find XYZ fantastic investment property, or how you help them alleviate a headache of a property that need to be sold. And so over time, part of the systems and processes is you're spending less and less time actually lead generating for the next client, because you're doing a great job and they're coming to you.
Your rapport building. Okay, so that's really interesting because we have so many people in the community that do so well building rapport and connections. And I remember that when I was in production. I mean, you do all this, and you build this incredible relationship, and then it's like, well, you might hopefully you love this home forever, or hopefully you love where you move, and then buy. Versus what you're saying is like one investor might buy 5 properties, and you just maintain this relationship, and you have this. Think about that. Who wouldn't want like a tight knit database that you just love on all the time that you already know, and there's no cold calling? That's awesome.
The goal, and not right as you're beginning to build a career around working with investors, right? But the goal my last few years in the transaction was, if I'm going to commit to working with someone as an investor, because I know the value I bring to the table, I want it to be someone who really realistically could and should be buying a property every quarter. So when I wake up on January 1st and, it's that continual panic, start over, oh my gosh, where's my business going to come from? Am I a fraud? Can I keep doing everything that I've done the last, can I repeat what I did last year, right? That whole mental thought process. That looks totally different when you've built a solid base around working with investors, because if all I need is 25 investors that are each going to do a deal every quarter, and there's my 100 transactions for the year. So it actually makes a lot of it a lot more simple, and you can invest your time looking for the next deal, which we're going to talk about more later. But your lead gen becomes finding the next investment property deal. And it's not about finding the client. Let me see if there's anything else on the mindset piece. Yeah, it's just, you can earn just as much dollar per hour with the lower price homes as you can seeking to raise your average sales price. So, and then the next piece, learn to see the properties like an investor. This takes some effort and energy. And so if you're really going to build a business based around working with investors, you're going to be putting a lot of time on task up front. But then just know that you'll get that back tenfold on the back end. So I say you have to learn to evaluate a property through key lenses. One of them is, what's the value that you could add to a property? So an investor walking through a property, or you walking through a property acting as an investor, or looking for your potential investor clients. One of the things that we did with the property was, it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and there was a really awkward dining room. I mean, it was a dining room off of the living room, and I just saw it, like it was just such a weird, odd shape, but I could see adding a wall. And so I asked the question, what would it cost to turn that dining room into a formal 3rd bedroom? And it turns out it cost less than $2,500, and it raised the value of the house by more than $40,000, moving from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. And yet that's an example of dozens of things that a regular real estate agent wouldn't know to look for, or wouldn't have seen, because it clearly had a table in it. It clearly was a dining room. And yet in that area, I just knew enough about the houses. I knew it didn't need a formal dining room. And if we could turn it into a 3-bedroom instead of a 2-bedroom, that was a massive value add opportunity. What will it rent for? That's one that's, on the one hand, it's easy to learn, and on the other hand, it's hard to learn. I say it's easy because you can run comps on for rent values in almost exactly the same way as you can run comps for sale properties to find values of what something's worth for sale. It's harder though, because most sources look at what's currently on the market for rent, not what's already rented. So like if you go to Zillow and you pull up for rents, you can see what's for rent in a specific city block, but you don't have the data to go back and say, what did that property actually rent for? Because it just gets pulled off of Zillow, if that makes sense. And I know there are some parts of the country that there are a lot of rentals that run through the MLS. And so in that case, you guys are all set and you definitely know how to run your rents. But in many parts of the country, rentals don't run through the MLS because, again, time on task. Most agents don't think it's worth their time to advertise $1,000 or a $1,200 or a $1,500 a month rental. And so in those areas, you really do have to get creative in learning how to determine what a property is going to rent for. And you really need to be able to determine within at least $100 range what it's going to rent for before you actually go see the property or send an investor out to look at the property. Another lens to look through would be what repairs are necessary to attract good tenants, not just what repairs absolutely have to be done, but like what's actually necessary to attract good tenants. And I'll give you a story on that. I have a property on Luther Street, and Luther Street was not my best deal, but not my worst deal. It was kind of an average deal. It had a bathroom that was in really pristine condition from, I don't know what era, the 80s, I'm going to say, but it was like in perfect condition. It had this disgusting red tile, not brick, tile, that went up like 2/3 of the way up the wall, all the way around. And I made the evaluation when I bought it. Of course, I bought it on a shoestring budget. I didn't really have the funds to renovate the bathroom. And I just said, it's in perfectly fine condition. We're going to leave that bathroom. And it was in perfectly fine condition. But it turns out good tenants don't want to live in mediocre neighborhoods with red tile bathrooms from the 80s. And consistently, that property took an extra 30 to 45 days longer to rent than all my other rental properties, like consistently. And I finally bit the bullet the 4th time I think it came up for rent. And I was like, okay, we're gonna paint the tile. And I'd gotten, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a product out there that it paints over ceramic, and it's a lot cheaper than like retiling a bathroom or replacing a bathtub, and it can work really well. And so I had my contractor out there to get started, and he calls and he is like, I don't know what the heck you're thinking, this is beadboard. And it was literally like, you know what beadboard is? Like, it was literally sheets of the easiest to remove thing. And so it took him like 10 minutes to demo it because there was no demo. It was literally pulling off the sheets. And then he had to make a trip to Lowe's because he had all the wrong supplies, and he had to get an appropriate beadboard. We just picked white because that looks way better. And the whole entire project cost me $125. And I lost, 5 or 6 months of rent easily, because every time it turned, it would take that much longer to find a tenant because no one wanted to live in a bathroom with red tile. And so I share that like as a painful example. Every time I share it, it like kind of just breaks my heart a little bit. But just because something's fine doesn't mean it's fine. And that's especially true in rental properties. You really have to think like assuming that you would be a good tenant, right? Like, would you live in that bathroom? And if the answer is no, then that needs to be part of can I afford to buy this or not? Is like, can I afford to turn that into a bathroom that I would actually feel comfortable living in? Another one is the location desirable? And we know this. There's good parts of town and bad parts of town, and we know what we are and aren't allowed to say as real estate agents and all that. But I'll say too, when I'm selecting properties to send my investors that I think might make really good deals for them to purchase, I'm looking specifically for properties that I know are going to attract those good tenants. And part of what I'm looking at is it in a good area? Is it in a desirable school district? That sort of thing. Unless I have a investor who's specifically looking for something else, who's specifically looking for up and coming areas where they could buy low and hope that the property values appreciate as the city does a bunch of work over the next few years. I think that's all the big ones I need to get into on this one. Okay, what are the repair costs? And will the property cash flow in today's market given the investors' finances? This was a lot of what I did, and a lot of how I was able to work with so many investors is I could go in and I could look at a property and I could pretty accurately say, here's the scope of work that's needed to be done on a property, and here's about how much it's going to cost to have a contractor do it after closing. And then during the inspection process, during the due diligence process, we'd get bids, and I had to be relatively close or else deals would have been blowing up all the time. And so the way I did that, and again, this is one of those, if you're going to go all in on working with investors, it's going to take time, effort, and energy to get to the level where that really is a sustaining leg of your business. But I found my first few investors and I paid careful attention. They went and looked at their first property and I asked them to walk me through the property, act as if I knew nothing. Little did they know I had done like 2 transactions, right? Act as if I know nothing and just verbalize everything that you're seeing. And so I had investors that would walk me through and they would say, there's a crack on the ceiling. There's a Federal Pacific breaker box. Some of you that are in areas that used to have Federal Pacific breaker boxes, you know what a bad deal that is, right? Like, there's proof that there's something wonky going on with the foundation. There's a 40-year-old air conditioning unit, right? And I was listening good enough as I was getting to know these investors. I was listening good enough to what they liked and didn't like that my next round of houses that I sent them were a little bit better than the first round of houses I sent them. So they came back and then they came back and then they came back. And after I got to where I could walk in the house and I could see pretty much everything that they saw, then I changed the question and I said, now can you walk me through and everything that we see that's wrong with the house, can you just tell me about how much you think it costs to get it fixed? And you can't necessarily build everything off of what an investor says, but that was a good way for me to get started. I had 2 investors in particular. I don't know why they kept coming back to me. I think it's because they could tell I was hungry and I was listening.
Yeah, you're really good at what you do. I mean,
well, I wasn't then. I wasn't way back at the beginning, but I was willing to listen and I was willing to be coached, I think maybe was a part of it. But once we got past me learning how to see all the faults in a property, then it was easy. Then it just took another, 8 or 10 houses of them showing me, well, that bathroom needs to be completely remodeled. That's going to be about $4,000, or that we need new kitchen countertops and a new sink, new backsplash. That's going to be about blank, right? Learning the pricing happened a lot faster than learning how to see what's wrong with the property. And then we were off to the races. So then it's a matter of literally just plugging things into a deal analyzer. And it's easy when you can evaluate those 2 things. It's easy to see, is this property going to cash flow, or is there any upside? If the investor buys it $300,000 and puts $40,000 worth of work into it, is there margin that he could actually make a profit when he sells? But it's a process. And so again, we're not getting into the weeds on any of this. We're just we're looking big picture and seeing what our brains absorb. Third, make it easy. So if you're going to sell 100 investment properties a year, you got to think one-stop shop. Okay, so last time I'll say it, I promise. Think the one-stop shop model. What can you do to make it really easy for an investor to choose to work with you, and so easy that they choose to come back over and over and over again? So one thing that a lot of agents dislike about investors, or about the concept of investors as a whole, is that investors aren't loyal. And what I would say about that is they are loyal if you have a good enough value proposition. That's it. So I was crystal clear from the beginning, and luckily there was an investor who kind of helped walk me through a non-exclusive agency agreement and the thought process behind that. I was really big from early on in my career. Like, you're going to work with me on deals that I hand you. Procuring cause is what that's called. If I hand you the deal, you're going to work with me on that deal. If XYZ agent down the street hands you another deal, you're welcome to work with them on that deal. Or if you find a deal yourself, you can bring it to me or not. Like, I don't really care. But the deals that I hand you, which is more than me just setting up this basic MLS search and expecting you to do all the work, and reach out to me if there are any properties you want to go see, right? Like, when I'm the expert, if I hand you a deal and I say, hey, Tyler, 123 Main Street is for you. Here's why it matches your buying criteria. Then you work with me on that deal if you do that deal. And part of why that worked was, one, because I was lead generating for properties. I was scouring and finding good properties to send people. I was making it easy. They're not having to try to run their numbers and evaluate properties. I'm sending them ones that I think actually fit their criteria. And part of it too was I provided a lot of the solutions that a lot of investors, especially think out of city or out of state investors, would have. I had contractors lined up that could give bids at the due diligence period. And most all of them I had previously vetted, and they had done projects before. I'd seen their quality of work, right? I had lenders. That was always a huge question was, well, who should I go to for lending? Well, we all know there are lenders who should be working with investors, and there are lenders who should not be working with investors. There's also multiple types of investing loan products. And so depending, like, I could have a 3-minute conversation with an investor, and I could say, oh, you should contact Mark. Mark would be great for you. Here's the loan product that he's probably going to recommend for you, right? Like, getting to the point, it took a while. It took a lot of effort and energy to get to where I was the one-stop shop, but that's what I would say. If you want this to be a big portion of your business, you've got to become the expert in your space, and you don't have to become the expert all at once, and you sure as heck don't have to pretend like you're an expert when you're not. I did not walk into my first few houses with investors and say, I know everything. I walked in and I said, pretend like I know nothing and just verbalize everything you're seeing. Now, if you'll notice, I didn't also say, hey, I know nothing. I'm a brand new agent. Can you tell me what you're seeing? Right? Like, I had a little more poise, if that's the right. I was a little more composed than that, but I also walked in and let them teach me what they had to teach me. And over time, I grew my knowledge and education to a level that really I was a solution for many, many, many big investors. So one-stop shop. That's even as simple as we would handle everything from closing until it was time to turn it over to the management company. And we had 3 management companies that we recommended they interview, that our clients really loved working with, and that frankly, were managing some of my properties. Having that whole entire process, right? Like, we'd collect the keys at closing. We already had the vendors lined out, and we collected their check at closing so that they could, get their materials and go get started working on the project. Like, us coordinating all of that, we did for an extra fee the last few years. It was in addition to our commission, and it's part of how I earned the right to sell as many investor transactions as I sold. The fourth one, systems and processes. And I've already said this a couple of times on the call, but you'll get to a point where you can focus your lead gen efforts on finding the next great investment property. And so it's what could I be doing to find the deal, whether I'm able to represent the seller or not. Where's the next deal and how do I find it? MLS searches, being really consistent with your MLS searches, setting up parameters so that the MLS emails you houses that would work for investors, and you can just look at them. I got to where I could look at a property on the MLS, and in 90 seconds, I could determine if it was worth us going out to shoot a property video of, or if it was not a good enough deal and it was not a property that would work as a good investment property. Another one, and this is going to be one of the 2 takeaways that I'd recommend for anybody that's interested in moving to the next level of working with investors, is get serious about some networking groups in your area. So networking groups, think investor meetup groups, or yeah, that's most of it. You can find them on meetup.com. There's probably several on there. Bigger Pockets has local networking groups.
Bigger
There are a
Pockets
lot
is great. The podcast too. Yeah.
totally. There are a lot of investor Facebook groups. So think like I'm in Fort Worth now, so I would be searching like Fort Worth real estate investors, or Fort Worth investors, or Fort Worth landlords, Fort Worth, right? Like think some of the key terms: Fort Worth wholesalers, Fort Worth discounted properties, Fort Worth real estate buy/sell. Those will connect you with people, and the people can connect you with the events. I am not super friendly, and I've not liked the networking component of any of my careers. That's been my least favorite part of all of it. And I know that that's not true for most of you on the screen. Most of you probably are a whole lot more friendly than I was, slash am. I don't know why I said was. Still not friendly.
We've gotten more. So I love that about you, because I knew you didn't really like hugs. Like when we first started, like you've gotten so warm after you have your kid. And I mean, you intentionally worked on that. Like, I think that's amazing. I mean, anyways, I always respected you. And yeah. Anyways.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And I will say, so I guess why I say that is, if I can do networking groups, then anyone can do networking groups. So what I would encourage is go to, I don't care if you just pick one a month. You're looking for just a few people that look, assuming you look uncomfortable, find a few other people that look uncomfortable and just chat, start a relationship with them, right? Start a conversation with them. My very first networking group that I went to, and I think I might share a story about 2 different networking groups, because I really think it could be one thing that could like really change everything for you in 2025 with working with investors. But I went to my very first one, and I did find a little old lady. She wasn't super old, but kind of, that looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Like she really did look totally out of pocket. And I started a conversation with her. Come to find out, her husband had died and left her with 7 homes, a small portfolio, and she had no idea what she was doing. And they were his thing, and she needed to get them sold. And she walked me through all the information that she had. I thought that I might have an investor that was interested in them, and so I asked her, we set up a time, and I walked him through them. We got there, they were in way worse condition than she knew. And it wasn't that she was being dishonest. She just literally had no idea how to look at real estate. And so I met with her after we looked at the homes at Padera, and I just walked her through her options. My investor was interested in a couple of her properties at a really low price. And another option was for her to let me list them. And get her top dollar on the MLS, top dollar for the condition they were in. She wasn't willing to do any work. She didn't have the money for it or any of that. And she agreed to move forward with me listing the properties. 3 of them I did sell to one of my investors, a different investor than that one that had seen them initially. But so 3 of them I double-ended. And then about 15 months later, after all those were sold, she had me sell her primary residence as well. And she moved back to Kentucky with a high school boyfriend. It was kind of a sweet, like happily ever after story. So one investor meetup group turned into 11 pieces of business in the span of about a year and a half, which is kind of crazy, right? And like we would look at that and say, yeah, I would spend 3 hours lead generating for 11 pieces of business, but like nobody does it. So that's my encouragement to you is for real, go to an investor group. Yes, there are some people with some very big egos in those rooms, and that's totally okay. Start networking with people. And your goal would be to either ask the question, who is here that I could add value to, not from a know-it-all real estate agent perspective, but like who actually really does need your help. And then the second question would be, who's here that really could teach me some things? Like who's here that really does have the next level of expertise, and I really they're eager for another student, and I could be that person and partake in all of their knowledge. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But investor meetup groups, I think, could be really huge. And then the second thing from a systems and processes perspective that I did ultimately that really helped me scale this was I moved to property videos instead of showings. So I was already working with several medium to bigger investors when I got this idea at a Tony Robbins conference. It just came to me. I was thinking clearly, and there it was, property videos. And I ran it by a couple of my investors. They were super excited about it. Instead of meeting Tyler at a potential property to go look at a property that he may be interested in buying, I would go shoot a video of that property and hand it to him. All of my investors were so excited about it because of the time they could buy back. Never mind buying back my time. They could buy back time because they knew that I could see the property as well as they could. I could point out all the deficiencies in the property and they didn't have to be there. And it was a game changer for me first because then I was at a point where I didn't have to, if Tyler ended up not wanting to buy the property, I could go ahead and hand the property to Veronica. I didn't have to go take Veronica out for a second showing, right? Because I already had the video. I just needed to email the video to her and tell her to go watch it. So it saved me tons of time. And then long term, I was able to leverage that. I stopped shooting the videos. I hired my second assistant and she went out after I got her trained. She went out and she started identifying the properties and shooting the videos and doing all of that. So systems and processes, you really can scale the investor side of a business and be way more leveraged than I think you could be on the average real estate agent side.
That's interesting. So it's like you can basically create a business in a sense with this that's sustainable, and you have a team more so than you're just accumulating new client. Like it's a different business structure essentially if you go
Totally
all
different. Totally different.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had a business model that I could have kept up, give or take 100 homes a year, working no more than 12 hours a week. I just got to a point where I fell in love with coaching and I didn't want the 12 hours anymore. I was willing to give it like 2 or 3. And frankly, I think that whole concept of seventh level is super elusive and is not a reality for hardly anyone, maybe the 0.5%.
Well, we've coached people who are in the top, I mean, in the top 100 in the world for Keller Williams, and seventh level is, I mean, rarely is it actually seventh level. You usually have to come back in. You usually have to, I mean, not that it's not impossible, it's just not as common as we throw it out. So this would be more sustainable to really build and pass off it, or
well, so for most people, the 10 to 12 hours a week is fine if that's all you're doing. I just wasn't willing to put it in. And so ultimately what I did was I sold my business. And it's been 3 years now, give or take. It's probably been like 2.5. My employees are still with the company that I sold it to. They're still doing a decent book of business every year for my investors, right? Like, so I ultimately had a product that I could package and sell when I decided I was totally done. But for most people, 10 to 12 hours a week is a pretty awesome job to sell 100 homes, right? And then the last thing, mistakes to avoid when working with investors, and then we can wrap this up. Over promising and under delivering. I just hate that. Like, I want to analyze a property in such a way that it's super clear worst case scenario, it's going to cash flow X dollars a month, right? Not best case scenario. I want a property to perform way better than I said it was going to perform, because that's how you get the raving fans and the repeat customer service. So getting to a point where you're conservative on analyzing numbers is super helpful. And then the other big mistake I could think of is putting people in the driver's seat and telling them, hey, I'm going to set you up on an MLS search. Just shoot me a text if you have any properties that you're interested in. I did it exactly the opposite, and that's how I got to 100 homes a year, investment properties a year. Was I would tell investors, when you send me a property, you just bog it down. We've already seen it, and if we're not sending it to you, we've ruled it out for one reason or another. Like, I know what you're looking for, and I was really clear on their needs analysis. I'm going to hand the property to you, and if I haven't sent it to you, know that I've seen it. Like, I just haven't sent it to you because it doesn't work. And that's totally backwards from the way that most real estate agents run their business. Wow, that didn't work well. Okay, so two things that I would encourage as we're wrapping up. One, as far as action items. One, I already said, find a networking group, even if it's once a month, and start going to an investor networking group. That's a great way to start getting your reps and all of that. Two would be start analyzing investment properties. The ideal would be one per day. If you could just say, I'm going to pretend like 123 Main Street is an investment property, and I'm going to analyze it as if it were an investment property. That would be crazy awesome. One per day, just the best of whatever you can find. But even if you're not willing to do one a day, even like 1 or 2 properties per week of I'm going to run it through a calculator would be insanely fantastic. And if you do that 4 to 6 weeks from now, you're going to be like leaps ahead of people who don't start analyzing properties. You have to start looking at how the numbers work, if that makes sense. So if it's okay with you, Tyler, I'm going to stick a link in the chat. I have a investor toolkit that I'd love to leave with anybody who wants it. And one of the tools, it's got 4 of my favorite tools. One of them is my spreadsheet that I use for analyzing properties. I'll just say the spots that are pink on the investor toolkit, the cells that are pink, they're the cells that you can edit. And the cells that are not pink, if you edit them, you'll mess up the formula. So only edit the pink cells. If you have any questions, if you choose to download it and something isn't working or it doesn't make sense, it'll come from my email address. And so just reply back to me and ask me your questions, and I'm super happy to help with that. And my brain is blanking. If you don't like my spreadsheet, Ballpark Deal is an app that works about as well as my spreadsheet, Ballpark Deal. Okay. And then there's another website that works pretty well as well. It's called dealcheck.io. Dealcheck.io. But I would love to interact with you guys more. So I'm gonna stick this link in the chat, and I'd love for you to download my spreadsheet.
Thank you so much. So cool. Yeah. So grateful to have you. All right.
My pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, so this Thursday, right, is our last day of, if you're in ADHD Agents, which is basically the ADHD-friendly version of like these major master classes for real estate training. So ADHDagents.com. This Thursday is our last session of Database Bootcamp with Philip Alderfer. And then the next week we go to with Molly De Mattos, and that is the Mastering ADHD Mindset. And she was Bold Coach of the Year. So that's included in the monthly membership. So ADHDagents.com if you want to do that. And otherwise, we'll see you on Tuesday, next Tuesday. So thank you guys for being here, and have a wonderful week. All right. Take care, everybody.